Alright, so I'm continuing to document some of these things. The way we cut these scarf joints is we use a piece of purple heart that's been cut at a pretty steep angle here, and we clamp it. It helps if you have the end wales in place, and we try to clamp it to where the line, the join line, falls above or just below the end well. Whatever we can get the most stable wood to. So we cut it, and you can use a fine multi-master or something like that. I personally use one of these little Japanese saws, and it's very nice. It goes, to me, just as quick. The next step is to get a piece of rib material cut at the proper angle, and the way I do that is I just use the belt sander. I just lay it up there and sand it until I have the proper angle, and it fits right on there. Alright. After that, we have to clamp it. Clamping it is the tricky part, and depending on the joint, I use 2 or 3 clamps, just little C-clamps like this, and I will use 2 pieces of wood to hold it in place. And I like to use a thin piece of wood that is relatively flexible, and I just coat it with regular masking tape, or not masking tape, packing tape. And the higher quality the tape, the less likely that epoxy sticks to it. So, keep that in mind. And what I like to do is I like to take and put the first one on, and this is why I say sometimes I use 3 clamps. And I will put the first one on, and this will give me something to clamp onto. This saves me a lot of sitting there fiddling around, and plus I try to align it with the rib so that whenever I put this on there, all I have to do is keep it in line and it will hold its shape. Alright, so the next step is to put epoxy on, and the epoxy that we use is called G-Flex, and that's it. Nasty snot looking stuff. And I have quite a bit mixed up because I'm also working on something else as soon as I'm done with this. So just take a small amount and put it on there, and you want to get a layer on there. You don't want to just put a really thin coat on there, and you want a layer, because if you have some epoxy that squeezes out, that's fine. But if you have a dry spot, well, that's not fine. And see, I've put it all on there, and I've made sure to go all the way up to the edge. And it's okay if you get some on the tape, because the tape will just peel right off. And since you're applying clamping pressure to it, it will hold very well. So you can clamp this up there if you're in a tricky position, which this is not. You can clamp this up there and then push the piece down inside of there. In this case, I'm just going to be taking the piece, and I start above where I need to go to, and then slowly push it down until it meets the area I need it to be. And then I'm going to take it and put my prepared piece up here. There we go. Just like that. Looks like everything's nice and aligned. And grab my other clamps, and I clamp towards the top first, just kind of loosely, because I might need to come back here and realign it, and that's okay. I just sight down the edges to make sure that it's alright and it's fitting properly. Alright, now that I have that done, now I want to have a clamp directly over the center of the joint. Let me tighten this one down just a little bit. Another good reason to use wood on both sides of this is that you put a lot of clamping pressure on this joint, and it will try to slide apart. And this clamp is good. It's got debris on it, probably from doing this. And I try to land roughly in the center, and then I want to tighten it down pretty snug. There we go. I can see epoxy squeezing out. That's okay. Make sure everything's nice and tight. That's it. Done. The hardest part really is getting your angles correct. My boss has this jig here for us, and we just clamp it in place and saw alongside of it. But depending on the size of the rib, sometimes my angle will change. This is a less acute angle, and this angle is different because it's for a different canoe where the ribs are a little bit thinner, and so the angle has changed, and so I adjusted for it. The way I do it is I try to make my join area at least as long as the rib is wide, and that seems to be a good rule of thumb. I haven't had any break off, and they look pretty good once you plane them to shape, which is how you get this. You just plane them to shape, then you take a rasp if you need to and rasp the little bit of epoxy, squeeze that off. And you can see on this one I just put epoxy on the top because the rib is actually in good shape, except for, well, I mean, the end grain's a little rough. So that's it. That is how you scarf a new rib on.